Hi, and welcome to the I Teed Myself podcast. My name is Matthew Miniman. This is episode 140. What can Scooby-Doo teach us about conditional access? So, Scooby-Doo is a crazy show. It is a fever dream of a cartoon. At least that's the way I feel about it. It ran from the late 70s basically until the 2000s, and it is the show, and there's still episodes being made about it today, although whether or not they can be considered Scooby-Doo is a question. But anyway, the whole point of Scooby-Doo is that it follows these four kids, teenagers really. Their names are Scooby-Doo. He's a dog, not really a teenager. He's a Great Dane, giant Great Dane, that is also perpetually in fear for his life and does not want to do anything to put himself or any of his people at risk, which is pretty normal of Great Danes. They're pretty scared dogs. There's Shaggy, his presumable owner and best friend. Then there's Daphne, who is, I guess, the pretty popular school girl. And then there's Fred, who is presumably the football star jock guy. And then there's Velma, who is the smart one. She knows everything. She comes up with all the ideas. She effectively makes the rest of the troop dance to her tune. She is truly the mastermind behind all of the crimes that are perpetrated in these shows, because that is what these shows are about. They're about solving mysteries that are actually crimes and making sure that the perpetrators, the suspects, get caught. Now, for the most part, these are mundane crimes, and sometimes they're not even crimes. Sometimes it's just people who want to be left the fuck alone, and these fucking teenagers come onto their property and decide to make that even worse. Maybe some of these people are on the spectrum, right? Maybe they just don't want to talk to anybody. Maybe they don't want to have people there, so they make up all these ghosts, because that's what happens. Inevitably, during the show, the crew, the gang, will stumble upon some mystery where it's a monster or a ghost or a zombie or whatever. It's something that's chasing people away. It's preventing them from going into this area. And I don't know how many weird scenarios they run into like this, but it's in the hundreds. Like they find these random things, and it's never an extreme crime, a capital crime. It's never anything like somebody died or somebody's been kidnapped. It's always things like, oh, the Vernon farm has had a lot of spooky noises coming from there. We better go check it out. Or, hey, nobody's been able to get into this one abandoned building. Maybe we should go figure out why. And really kind of weird things for teenagers to be really interested in. They're really just trying to go and find places to have sex and do drugs. But as an aside, the whole show is centered around also bringing in guest stars and whatnot. And whenever they find a mystery, they also find this guest star, and then they all decide to split up. And typically, the way that the split up works is that it's Velma goes off by herself, or sometimes she goes off with Shaggy and Scooby, or Shaggy and Scooby just go off by themselves in search of food, reluctantly, by the way, because they don't want to be there, because they're just like, hey, this isn't any of our business. Maybe we should go do something else. But then Daphne and Fred decide they want to go off on their own as well. And sometimes a guest star will go with one group or the other, just to provide some sort of comic relief or to transport the story just a little bit. But anyway, inevitably, in the episode, what will happen is the gang will end up being chased. And they'll be chased around whatever facility they're in. Because again, it always happens in a building. It's never in an open field. It's never in a giant warehouse. It's always in this abandoned building or abandoned Victorian house or whatever. And when they do this, what's going to happen is they'll get chased, and then they'll all appear to be chased down the same hallway. And What's really weird is that it will be this non-Euclidean hallway where the geometry doesn't make any sense. There'll be several doors along up and down this hallway, and the gang will run through one side, one person will run through another, and it'll seemingly transport across the screen several different times, inevitably with everybody congregating in the middle in either a giant heap pile or running towards the screen. And the SCP Foundation has actually kind of summarized this in a really good way, in that it's SCP-K9-J2 is a hallway within SCP-K9-J that has a non-Euclidean geometry. When rock or pop music is played, SCP-K9-J1 pursues subjects into SCP-K9-J2. Any doorway entered into SCP-K9-J2 will lead into another doorway within SCP-K9-J2. Subjects may find themselves running alone, with each other, or with SCP-K9-J1. The effect persists until any or all parties trip or attack one another. Which is true, because that's all that fucking happens in the show, and it's almost every episode. It's a crazy circumstance. And that is kind of how conditional access works. In a way. Kinda. Man, I'm going to make this work. So, conditional access. Let's discuss conditional access. Microsoft Conditional Access is the methodology of logging in through Microsoft 365. Now, I think I've promised to bring this up several times in previous episodes, and it's really important for folks to understand how conditional access works. It's because it can be very complicated. I've had several instances of clients and other organizations discussing how they're confused about how conditional access works. And it can really get confusing, especially because it doesn't work in the way that you want it to. It's not like a marble track or a if this, then that, because there are a lot of different paths that can be generated off of the same login structure that can block somebody from being able to access things. So what we have to do is we have to understand what conditional access does and how it works. So, and that can be a pretty big, daunting task. That can be a gigantic, daunting task. So let's start with the baseline of conditional access. So conditional access is exactly what it sounds like. The name describes the feature. Conditional access is providing access to users based on conditions about their specific login, or behavior. So the way that we can identify this in Microsoft 365 is we identify the user, any groups that the user might be a part of, the devices that they're attempting to log in from, the device type, where the device is, how they're attempting to log in. Then we have conditions such as networks. We have the apps that they're attempting to use. We have the type of session. We have how long the session is going to last, and whether or not the session is purview under a specific type of security policy or other security feature on the outside of conditional access. And so when we relate conditional access to this non-Euclidean hallway in Scooby-Doo, there are multiple doors that can be entered into based on condition and login type, and they all go into the same hallway, but each door can lead to another door. And that's something that we have to maintain the understanding, is that just because you craft one policy does not cover that login specifically or explicitly. That same door can be used multiple times, or multiple doors can be used all at once. And so we have to craft rules around this. And we have to basically thoroughly understand exactly how those doors are created and in what conditions do you come out of those doors to enter into other doors? Because this is all very straightforward, right? So let's start off with the basics. So the basic concept of conditional access is once you've been blocked, you are blocked. If there's a block in there, you do not gain access. So it is important to understand that, because if you fail a conditional access policy, if you fail for one reason or another, you will be blocked access. So what we do is we create in our conditional access is in order to make sure that our environment stays secure, what we want to do is we want to create a block access that covers when no other policy will apply. So the way you do this is you start off with a policy that blocks everything. And I know I'm going to get an argument from some administrators here, but the reason why you do this, there's a very good reason why you do this. You create this block policy at first, and then you create exceptions within that policy. And the reason why you have to craft this policy is that what you don't want to have happen is you don't want to have a policy that doesn't cover a specific login set or feature set that then allows everybody into the organization through that feature set. It is a failing of a lot of organizations because they don't protect their unknowns. They don't protect the future state. And by crafting a block policy that covers everything except for what you want to allow people access to, that will protect you from a future state of Microsoft or future state of conditional access. So when you craft this policy, what that means is if anything that isn't excluded explicitly will be blocked. Now, there are probably going to have to be multiple block policies based on the different scenarios that you want to block in. So let's just keep that in mind, is that once you've blocked a connection, you cannot approve it past that connection. So you have to craft exceptions through your block policy. So once we've crafted that, once we've created a locked door that unlocks based on specific characteristics that we want to protect, then we can go ahead and craft our policies. In the very basic, there is a policy that you can create that basically targets all users, that requires a specific type of access in order to log into any feature within Microsoft 365. This is the very basic conditional access policy. And the way you craft that is you target all users again, and then for your grant controls, you add a multi-factor authentication strength that you have identified. And your multi-factor authentication strength is defined in different rules. And basically all that means is that we identify multi-factor authentication strengths based on if it's just multi-factor authentication, meaning SMS, OTP, multi-factor or Microsoft Authenticator app, so on and so forth. And then there are stronger ones like phishing resistance or passwordless logins like passkeys or the Authenticator app that will allow you to have a stronger authentication preference down the line. And of course, you can create your own multi-factor authentication strength elsewhere. And that's not really going to be the focus of what we're talking about, but just know that information is there. Creating a multi-factor authentication strength means you can customize what multi-factor authentication methods are available to the user for that login type. So the very basic, again, is one that targets all users, all apps, and requires multi-factor authentication strength. And so what that means is when a user logs in or attempts to log in to any app in the tenant, they are then presented with a multi-factor authentication prompt, and then they have to satisfy that prompt in order to pass through the organization or into the organization. Where that kind of fails is if what happens if you have a user who or a utility set that you don't want to have people multi-factor authenticate into. Like what happens if you have that? Well, there's a lot of different ways that you can craft a policy to identify that. And so, for instance, one of the things that's very common is organizations want to allow people to access their email from their phone anywhere, but they want to prevent computers from being able to access their email from anywhere but the office. And so the way that that policy would work is we would create an exception in the first two policies where we say any user can access, we create an exception for the block rule that basically is like, hey, we want to allow users into all of our apps or into email specifically, Exchange. And so the exception has to get created on the block rule for the Exchange. And then what we want to craft is we want to say, we'll create two separate policies. One that says that targets specifically mobile devices and Exchange. And we say any network we target any network and we say any network can be accessed, can access this if it's coming from an Android or iOS device, and then push that through. Microsoft also still has the dream of Windows mobile devices in there. There is an option for that. There's no Windows mobile device, so you don't have to worry about that, at least not one that can function inside of the modern internet. So anyway, then there is, from there, you craft the policy to allow them to connect via multi-factor authentication. So that process will work, but you want to make sure that you exclude them from the other policy as well, from the original allow into every app through Office 365. You just want to create that exception for mobile devices. But then you want to craft a separate policy that denies the access outside of the Office for PCs. So the way you craft that policy is you target all users, target Exchange, and then if the device is Windows and the network is not a trusted IP set, block the connection. You'll just create another block rule. And then the way that those two rules work in tandem is Office 365, when a user attempts to connect through a mobile device anywhere, they'll go through that one particular mobile device policy that we've created. And then if they try to connect through PC, if they're connecting from a trusted network, they'll just go through the overall policy. But if they are attempting to connect through a untrusted network, they'll get blocked. They'll just be presented with, you don't have permission to access this resource at this time, which is how you want it to work. Another common use case or common conditional access policy that we have to set up is one that allows a specific group of users access to a specific utility or specific tool set. Most commonly now, this is becoming AI or one of the AI agents. And so, for instance, we can create a conditional access policy that targets that enterprise app that gets created for the AI agent. And then we craft that specifically for the users that we want to have access to. And then we create a block rule, an accompanying block rule for that then blocks users from being able to access that group if they're not a part of the allowance group that we have there. And so the way that you would craft that particular rule is that you would target all users for the block group, but then for the block rule, but then exclude the users that are part of the allowance group from the block rule. And that's kind of how you would craft those. And the combinations go way far down the line. If you want to target specific devices and have different authentication flows based on where you're coming from, or based on the type of device, or based on any of that detail, you can have these different authentication flows. You can even target specifically whether it's a joined device to the domain, or if it's a trusted device in Intune, or if it's compliant. And you can craft policies targeting those specific things as well. And those are all different settings that you can target. Just remember that the way to ensure that stuff gets blocked appropriately is you want to craft a block rule that targets those specific things and then exclude what you want to allow in. And you want to create different conditional access policies for the allowance for a very specific reason. It's because you want everybody to be able to log in by default. But what you don't want to do is you don't want to just give people direct access. You want an attacker to be challenged when they're attempting to access sensitive data. And so you create a separate allow policy for these different areas so that if an attacker gains basic access into a Microsoft 365 account, they are then challenged every step of the way to add an additional security, an additional MFA method. They're challenged to access Teams. They're challenged to access SharePoint. They get those additional challenges so that even if they establish persistence, there's a lot of noise generated, there's a lot of detail generated, and that gives you an opportunity to catch any attacker that exists in the environment. And then ultimately, what you're going to be able to do if you craft your conditional access policies this way is you're going to be able to really fine tune and see where you go from point A to point B and point B to point C and from point A to point D and from point E to point F. And eventually you're gonna see where you get blocked, and it really is gonna help you catch the bad guy. It's really gonna help you unmask old man Vernon, who is really just chasing people off his property because he didn't want to be fucking talked to by anybody. He didn't want to get sold anything anymore by anybody. And so he just wanted to live on his farm by himself in his Victorian house and be left alone. But these goddamn meddling kids ruined his plans of being a hermit. Because, yeah. That's all I got time for today, guys. I hope you all have a great